Hello and welcome to another episode of the Omnibus podcast, Minnesota's best source for political news inside and outside the Capitol. I'm your host, Jeremy Munson, a former state representative from southern Minnesota, and we have three guests today, former Representative Tim Miller, Senator Nate Wiesenberg, and Senator Bill Liskey. Gentlemen, thank you for joining. Today I want to talk about this kind of battle that's going on between some of the grassroots groups and the establishment groups when it comes to talking about the pro-life debate that has kind of spewed out into public here with the passage of a major health policy omnibus bill that passed the House and the Senate. We got a letter from MCCL, Minnesota Citizens Concern for Life, attacking a group called Action for Liberty, which has been organizing grassroots activists to support pro-life legislation. And it's interesting because MCCL was founded decades ago to promote, to end abortion or to promote, life and to advocate for pro-life issues. And so we have one group who's taken a hard stance against abortion, and they're being attacked from our own side, by MCCL. And then we also had the state party issue a letter saying that this bill, that the legislators couldn't prevent abortion funding from the bill, and they had to pass it because of a Supreme Court ruling, a Minnesota Supreme Court ruling by the name of Doe v. Gomez. And I know that Tim Miller has been a longtime advocate for pro-life issues, and he was my go-to guy in the Minnesota House. We served together. And so I wanted to ask him to come on the show and explain Doe v. Gomez, because a lot of people have been asking me, like, what's going on with these different groups. We got some legislators that voted to pass this, and some of the legislators that voted against it said it had funding for Planned Parenthood in it. So Tim, give us a background on what Doe v. Gomez was, how that ruling came about, and what its impact is to abortion in the state of Minnesota.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. And thanks for asking this question, because it's an important piece. For people watching this, there's multiple pieces, so please follow along. We won't try to make it complicated. I think there's other people that are trying to make it complicated to confuse. So Doe v. Gomez was a state Supreme Court decision in 1995, and this isn't going to be a constitutional law class. We're just going to give basically an understanding of what it is. What Doe v. Gomez fundamentally said is that if there's Medicaid funding for giving birth to children, that's considered to be reproductive health care, and they consider abortion to be reproductive health care as well, and so therefore it should be funded as well. Now, I don't agree with that, and that's where we can get into the arguments, and that's been argued over the years, and this should be overturned at some point. But it's not. That is the way that it is. So what that means in practicality is if there is a woman on Medicaid and she wants to have an abortion, the taxpayers have to fund it based off of Doe v. Gomez. There's been some other decisions since then that have sort of supported this, added weird twists and turns on it that make it even worse. But that's the fundamental truth. Now, when it comes to when people say, well, did my legislator vote for abortion funding or not? We can get into this discussion. So I want to be brief on this, but very clear. It is true that abortions for Medicaid patients that want to have them are going to be funded by taxpayer dollars. And unfortunately, until we can do something about it, probably in the courts, there is some legislation that's been proposed. It's very difficult, though, but has been proposed in the past. But most of the experts believe it can happen. It's going to have to happen in the courts. Until we can overturn Doe v. Gomez, if someone on Medicaid wants to have an abortion, the taxpayer is going to pay for it. And that funding is going to be somewhere in the state budget. Now, where I disagree with what's being said is when you hear someone say, well, we have to fund abortions or we have to fund Planned Parenthood. See the little bit of shift there? We have to fund Planned Parenthood because of Doe v. Gomez. That part isn't true. We just need to pay the bill if someone has an abortion, like it or not, but you do. But if you look at the overall budget in health, there's competitive grants, there's other pots of money that are going to Planned Parenthood that we absolutely can defund. And I dare say that I know that Senator Wiesenberg is And if I said your name wrong, I apologize. We hardly know each other. But I understand he proposed something today that got rid of all the funding. I'm certainly for that. I think it's a tall order. But if you are a pro-life person in the state of Minnesota, such as I am, uh, even some losing battles are battles you need to take. And my overall concern is the legislature has largely been pacified into, well, there's nothing we can do about it. I'll finish with that, Jeremy, but I do want to say I want to address one of the things that only gets discussed during campaign season, not now, is it was very clear. I was with the state party last year, and it was very clear at the state and federal level, Republicans are not to talk about abortion in campaigns. We don't want to make it an issue. I disagree with that, by the way, but that's what's being told. I think that's at play in here. That's at play here as well. We should discuss that sometime further on. But I hope that's a good understanding, kind of a quick overview of what Dovey Gomez is, what the funding is, what it's not. And I'd be happy to answer any questions if that didn't make sense.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of my questions I have is, you say that Minnesota Supreme Court says that if we are using Medicaid in Minnesota to pay for births, that we also have to pay for abortion. The way that we get Medicaid to this program is that the legislature funds it. So technically, if the legislature doesn't fund Medicaid, and I know that would be a big bar to jump over, but if we didn't do that, then you wouldn't fund abortion. So voting against this bill could stop it, just plainly from that perspective. Now, that would be a losing argument come election time for a lot of Republicans, because now you're shutting off all of Medicaid. But it's kind of like drawing a line in the sand and saying, look, if we don't fund it now, I mean, the Supreme Court ultimately follows law, right? They have to interpret and follow law. If we change the laws and we say you can't have abortions in the state, they have to also follow that. That would overrule Dovey Gomez. And so the legislature has the ability to change the law. We could change the Constitution, right? Even without the governor's approval, we could have both the House and Senate pass a constitutional amendment that goes to the ballot and could also stop abortions. That is technically can happen. Whether you believe it will pass politically, that's different. But people are not wrong to say they're going to, pass. They want to pass these bills, vote for this way, because it is technically possible. You can't tell legislators that they can't.
And legislators, we need to not just vote red or green on things. We need to aspire. We need to look and say, this is how Minnesota needs to change. And on much less detrimental issues, there's things that sound really good and they still take 10, 12 years to pass. But if you're not pressing forward, then you're never going to address this sort of thing. I actually believe, it's totally my opinion, there's no proof to this, but I believe that this is kind of the repetition that people want to see. They don't want to take up the fight because they're afraid of how it's going to play out in the suburbs. And then when we have to vote, we say, well, we have to fund abortion, stop yelling at us, and then MCCL does their thing, and then it happens all over again. But you're right. We would have to go to the point to where we say, well, then we're not going to fund any Medicaid at all for natal care. Okay, that's something that we should at least put on the table. But also understand, from what I could tell in this bill, I'm not the expert at reading between the lines on some of these very complex bills, but I saw competitive grant money that's put under sexual and reproductive health. That's what we're talking about here. And in 2015, my good friend Kathy Lomer, State Representative Kathy Lomer, had a bill that basically took all of that money that I just described there, because it's technically a competitive grant, and gave it all to local poor health clinics throughout the state. Because all of it, not most of it, all of it at the time was going to Planned Parenthood. I almost guarantee you that line item in this bill, all a little over $22 million over the biennium, is all going to Planned Parenthood right now.
Yep. So the bill was introduced in the House. It is a House file, and it passed the House with 29 Republicans voting yes on this bill. Now, only one Republican needed to vote yes to have it passed, because all the Democrats supported it. But 29 Republicans voted yes on this bill, and many of them spoke out about how abortion is being funded in this bill. So after it passed the House, it went to the Senate. So Senator Wiesenberg, I'll let you talk about the bill. Maybe if you can share what the what people's thoughts were on the bill when it came to the Senate. I know you don't talk about what happened in caucus, but kind of give me an idea of what people's thoughts were, and then talk about the amendment that you offered and how, what the votes were on that.
Well, I think I can talk about the amendment and tell you about the bill. I think Senator Liskey can probably tell you more about the bill or better about the bill because he's in health services, and this is his world. I mean, I know what's in the bill, but he'd be able to articulate it much quicker and faster and better. So if he wants to do that.
Yeah. So, Bill, you want to talk about this was the House bill. It wasn't the Senate file, but you guys probably had a lot of amendments, or the Democrats had a lot of amendments to go on the bill.
So yes and no, yes and no. So we didn't concur, we didn't accept the language. So when it came to the House or came to the Senate floor, Senator Wickland automatically denied the House language. So she overruled the language and she put her own language on top of it. That was the first action on the Senate floor. So she put on her thing, and yes, a lot of the underlying base pay, like the parts that we're talking about, were also in her bill, very much the same. Obviously, she had a lot of other policy and major changes that she's looking to do. So her first action was to not accept the House language, and then put hers over the top of it. So, in there, the base budget is the same across both bills, with this provision being in there, Medicaid being as a major part of the base budget in Health and Human Services. So, where we're at, if you want to describe the bill in the short version, she had a lot of things that she wanted to change. But the base budget was the same. So the House file and the Senate file matched on the base budget, and that's where we were at on that. So. Um, if that helps answer to maybe a little more in the weeds about what happened on the Senate floor.
Yeah. So just for the listeners, so what happened here is that the House file that Republicans and Democrats compiled together that funded Planned Parenthood and everything else was voted off the House floor, but that entire bill was rejected in the Senate, and they instead put on the language of the bill that they were creating to do similar stuff, same kind of funding for Planned Parenthood. So, why as a Republican would you vote for a bill that is going to be DOA on arrival in the Senate? And that the bill, when it comes back from conference committee, is going to be a lot worse anyways. So Senator Wiesenberg, you offered the amendment to strip out all the funding for Planned Parenthood.
Yeah. So what I did is there's in-state law, and I wish I had I don't know if, Liskey, if you have the bill number. I don't have it. I just have I
believe the House file 2435 was the original House file.
But in-state law right now, I don't know what the statute is, but it's subdivision 16.
Yep, 256.06B, I think was
I
the
think
state
that's what it
statute.
is. Yep. So then that
Sorry,
state statute.
try to remember all that off the top of my head.
Subdivision 16, it says abortion services. Medical assistance covers abortions and abortion-related services, including pre-abortion services and follow-up services. So that's what it says in state law. So I had an amendment that would strip that out. My amendment took that out, and that's what it would do. So everything else stayed in there, but I was just saying we're no longer going to pay for abortions. It's that simple. I just said that's what we're going to do, and that's how we should vote. And as Republicans, it's in our MNGOP Constitution that we're going to fight to protect life. So it shouldn't be hard. And in the Senate, it was 33-34. All the Republicans voted for my amendment. The Democrats didn't vote for it. But that is in the bill, and this bill, it ends up funding abortion. And some people say, well, if I vote against it, this bill won't pass. Well, it will pass. The Democrats are in control. They get whatever they want, and people are still going to be funded with health care. But we can all vote no. We can be principled and say, no, I'm not voting for it. I can't. I stood up to fight for life. So if you're voting for this, you're not doing that.
Senator, if I could just interject with that, even on the House side, I won't get into the nitty gritty of how session works. I'm just going to say, at the very least, why did someone in the House not bring forward that amendment to be voted on? At the least. Now, if it's a tie, because it's 67-67, there'd be a tie vote, and it would fail. We kind of know where it's going to go. But if you're not fighting, you're not doing. And at the very least, that amendment should have been put forward in the House.
And I would like to answer that if you want me to. From perspective, I think the reasoning behind it is Nathan, or Nate, as we want to call him, he's got Nathan on his title there, but Nate had a long discussion with our research team to figure out what statute we were trying to reference. It's not an easy amendment to create because you have to figure out and dig through state statute to find where it's defined. And then on top of that, knowing that Doe v. Gomez is kind of the reason why that statute exists in the first place, I have a feeling that the House members that generally would have brought that amendment forward are still relatively new to the game and probably didn't know that they could dig for that type of statute. And also, I think it depends on some other things that play that are behind the scenes, caucus.
I think so too, and we can maybe get into that with hopefully not confuse people, but I think there were dynamics there too. I just want to make it clear that it is plausible, and in the House, research is at multiple levels. It's kind of straightforward in the Senate, but in the House, we have nonpartisan research, and if I went into my nonpartisan research, I could just say, and I'm not faulting the younger legislators because if no one's telling them how to do this, they don't know that they can do it. But I just go in and say, here's what I want to accomplish. Now make it happen. They'll be like, well, Representative Miller, here's your choices. Do it this way or that way, or here's how we do it. So there is, my opinion is, and this is where, because I am very pro-life, as Jeremy said, it was the heart and soul of when I was there. And I think we've fallen into this trap of passivity, saying, well, there's nothing we can do. Yep. And the nothing we can do has tumbled us all the way down the hill to where we aren't even trying some of the simplest things. I brought up with Jeremy earlier, why has there not been legislation this year? As a whole in Minnesota, parental rights have been totally stripped from parents in many areas.
Yep.
Write an amendment that says a 12-year-old's not going to have an abortion if her parents don't know about it and don't okay it. Now, I'd like a lot more than that, but write an amendment that does that. And we didn't even see things like that. And that was disappointing for me.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the letter that came out from MCCL, because a lot of people trust MCCL as the largest pro-life group in Minnesota. And, you go to even your county fair, and MCCL has a booth there. And all of the volunteers that I've met from MCCL are staunch, conservative, pro-life. They're trying to do everything they can, and they don't maybe know what's going on at the legislature. When Tim Miller introduced the heartbeat bill, it wasn't supported by MCCL.
I lost my endorsement.
Yeah, Tim lost his endorsement because MCCL believes in an incremental approach to reducing abortion, not by eliminating it. They think it would be too big of a step. And I mean, politically, it might be difficult, but you're not inspiring conservatives to get out and vote and to help people if you support, they just had these really weak sauce bills that would maybe put a little more regulation on abortion centers. But in voting for that, you're basically codifying the right of people to abort children. So it's difficult. And so because there's this vacuum with the more conservative pro-life movement, that's where Action for Liberty or other groups have come out and taken a stronger approach to ending abortion. But this letter that came out from MCCL attacks Action for Liberty. They have a whole title saying how Action for Liberty cost unborn lives. And they blamed the loss of the 2022 Senate majority on Action for Liberty, saying that they were out attacking Republicans. But it was in fact the Senate Victory Fund that was out attacking the endorsed Republican candidate, who's now in the House, Tom DePel, when he was
his opponent in the primary, after the primary, endorsed the Democrat.
Right. Tony Jurgens was the non-endorsed candidate that the Senate Victory Fund was supporting, and all that money came out to attack Tom DePel for Tony Jurgens, and Tom DePel still won the primary. And then what did Tony Jurgens do? He quit and went out and endorsed the Democrat at a pro-abortion rally, and that Democrat won by a very small margin, like 100 or so votes. And it's for that very reason that the Senate is still in the minority, because the Senate Victory Fund came out and attacked our endorsed candidate. And that wasn't Action for Liberty. If anything, Action for Liberty was supportive of Tom DePel. They were supporting his campaign, as was I and Tim and a bunch of other conservatives, because he was a great candidate. Now he's in the House. But That was a major lie that MCCL came out and wrote. And the other thing is they talk about how the Supreme Court, the 95 Doe v. Gomez court case, ordered the state to pay for abortions. And they basically say there's nothing the legislature can do, and that the way that they have to end abortion is to elect a Republican governor who can then appoint justices to the Minnesota Supreme Court to overrule Doe v. Gomez, just like the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court overruled Roe v. Wade. Well, if that's the case, then there's no reason for MCCL to get involved in legislative races, and all the work they're doing to raise money to win a majority in the House and Senate is a total grift. If that's what they're saying, that the legislature can't do anything. It's very frustrating, I think, for a lot of people that support MCCL to read this letter and basically support the Republicans who are voting yes for this bill, which funds Planned Parenthood to the tune of $20 million. What are your thoughts?
I'll hop in if Nate doesn't want to. Something that bothers me about this letter the most is Nate's amendment was absolutely accurate on how we would attack this from the Senate floor. If we had the majority on the Senate floor and we forced that vote and everybody voted for it and it goes through, now that goes on to the conference committee, and if it survives conference committee, which, I mean, that's, again, more weedy stuff, but let's just say it gets passed into law. It sends over to the governor, and the governor signs it because he knows if he doesn't sign it, he's now saying that he doesn't want to fund Medicaid, which is a very bad political situation for him to be in, which is a great pressure point for us to try. The reality is it's going to be in the wise words of Senator McEwen, who for the last 2 years got to pass laws that were unconstitutional and were in question. We'll see in court. At the end of the day, we forced them to now readdress their position on Doe v. Gomez from 1995. I was 5 years old when that passed, or when that ruling came down. Things have changed drastically, obviously, since then. And by passing that amendment, if we were to have gotten that on there, they would be forced to readdress the whole situation.
Right. I'm in education committee with Senator McEwen, and they pass bills that are unconstitutional, and that's exactly what they do. They pass it, and then it gets fought in court, and then it gets voted down. But that we have to be fighting, and that's what we need to be doing. MCCL is taking an approach that isn't going to work. We're becoming more liberal, and as we're doing that, like Don Parker came in my office. He's a co-executive director, I believe, of MCCL right now, and he said, well, you have to look at it from a 30,000 foot view. And it's going to take 20 years to get to where we want to be. Well, if we continue to do this, we're going to continue to lose conservative voters, and our state just becomes more liberal. So look at Scott Jensen, for example. And I think Scott's a nice guy, and I think he did good work on COVID stuff. But that was it. That was his issue. He flip-flopped on abortion, and we lost 250,000 Republican voters. I mean, you don't register, but you can do the math and see who didn't vote throughout the state. So you had like maybe 250,000 registered Republicans not vote. I mean, he flip-flopped on abortion. Yes, I think it's okay. No, I don't, blah, blah, blah. Same with guns. I talked to Scott a few times. I said HR 4712, when Tim Walz was in Congress, he voted to allow babies to be left to die after they were born. I said, just tell that to people. It's that easy. I just told it to you in 10 seconds. So that's what I did in my district, which is a very red district, but I got Democrats to vote for me because they said, I am not going to allow kids to be murdered. And, in my district, Democrats still believe that abortion's wrong. But I said, it's that simple. Go say HR 4712. I don't want to have afterbirth abortion, which is murder. That was the messaging, and we didn't do that, right? That's how we stop that. That's how we get these people out. That's how we vote for that Republican governor. I mean, we missed that point now because now that's in law. I shouldn't say we missed it, but that would have been the good messaging at that time. So, get me back on track.
Yeah. Well, another thing I want to talk about, in addition to MCCL coming out and attacking people, the pro-life activists who wanted to stop this bill, the Minnesota GOP, the state parties, put out a rather lengthy letter along the same talking points, talking about how the legislature needed to pass this because it's the law and they can't stop it, which, as your amendment shows, it's not true. If you had if the Senate Victory Fund hadn't have messed in Tom DePel's Senate race, you guys would be sitting in the majority right now. And you could have passed that amendment to change it. Now, Governor Walz may have vetoed it, but as Senator Liskey pointed out, he would be shutting down Medicaid, right? I mean, that's the that's the end result. You could have
Well,
had it.
one thing that we lose track of that gets me a little bit worked up is we aren't talking about a transportation bill and how many miles of road we're going to build and how expensive it is, okay? Which is an important state function, so don't get me wrong, okay? But we're talking about the crisis of our time, okay? We are talking the death of children. And I know that there are Democrats who disagree with me on that that's not what we're talking about. But my Republicans agree that this is what we're talking about, and how we can not put everything that we have into putting up a battle, whether it be through the messaging, uh, as the senator said, or it's through the amendments that they put forward, or all of the above, but all these different things. Why are we not pressing just for the sake of its value? If you want to say, well, what will the people of Minnesota say? The people of Minnesota don't believe me about some of these things that are law in Minnesota than they disagree with me. They just go, well, it can't be as bad as what you're describing. I'm like, no, it really is as bad as what I'm describing. So why are we not putting up this fight? And what upsets me, Action for Liberty, people that know them, they're one thing. A lot of people that are watching this may not know who they are. They create a lot of attention, a lot of interest. I don't agree with the way that they do things. As they say, they've attacked me too. Okay. But they have a right to do what they want to do. Okay. And when I hear, well, we're getting in trouble because of this evil force called Action for Liberty, that's just kind of cheapening the argument a little bit. Okay. These guys are not threatening you in any personal way. They're saying bad things about the decisions that you're making, which is their right. Toughen up and prove them wrong. Do legislation, speak out, communicate some of these things to the people of Minnesota. That's how we win this. We do not win this by calling Action for Liberty a bunch of bad, nasty people. Okay, that doesn't solve anything. We might feel good about ourselves briefly, or we might say, well, see, it isn't my fault because they did something bad. But if you're elected as a leader, then act as a leader.
Yeah, we need groups to get grassroots people involved, and that's what our conservative Republicans are. We have grassroots activists, and you have got someone telling you the truth about things that are going on. And someone did a thing like, well, this bill has abortion funding in it. It has funding for illegals in it. It has funding for DEI in it. Pick something that's bad. There's many bad things in it. Vote no. But some Republicans will say, well, I had to vote for it because it had this in it. Yeah, well, still vote no, because it's bad. Not only is it an omnibus bill, and we shouldn't be voting on omnibus bills, but it also has all these bad things in it that we don't stand for. So say, this is why I couldn't vote for it, and your voters, if you're truly following your word, are gonna respect that. That's what I ran on. I'm anti-abortion.
And you talk to them. There were votes that I took where people back in district, or how can you vote against farmers in this way? I said, well, let's talk about it.
Yep.
I'll tell you why I voted no, what's involved. And I may not have changed their attitude about it, but they respected the fact that I was having a conversation with them. That's another intellectually lazy thing is I don't think we talk to the people of our district nearly often enough about these things. If you do that, they're going to respect when you make a decision. They might disagree with it, but they're going to respect you.
And I think another thing I see is, people are all these groups, MCCL, Action for Liberty, whatever group it is, they're all competing for the same funds from the same people. So now if Action for Liberty is getting funds and MCCL isn't, and it's not the message they want to spread, then that funding isn't there. So it feels to me, I've only been in the legislature for one term, but from what I see, maybe MCCL started out using grassroots and pushing no abortion, life begins at conception. Well, now their messages have even changed from life at conception to no abortion up to birth. So we totally went there, and we have to stand strong, and we have to have the message, no, life begins at conception, and that's what we're going to fight for, or we're going to lose all these conservative voters. And so when they do that, that's the perception is they don't care, and they don't care if they lose those voters, and maybe they don't. I don't know. But we got to stand strong, and we got to keep all these people in greater Minnesota involved in politics, and that's how we can win our state. Some people think the only way to win is to get the metro. What about all those people that didn't vote in the last election? We lost auditor by 6,000 votes statewide because we had in my opinion, a bad candidate at the top of the ticket that flip-flopped on really strong Republican issues.
Bill, Nathan, you talked about funding, MCCLs fundraising and stuff, and I want to talk about that too, because I think there's a lot of attacks against. Well, first of all, I think any grassroots organization or grassroots movement is being like labeled as Action for Liberty. We saw this in Otter Tail County, where the delegates that have been involved for 40 years kind of pushed back against the establishment, and all of a sudden the party was calling them Action for Liberty when they weren't. They weren't even, a lot of people aren't even involved in the organization, but there's a lot of attacks about, some of these groups, they call them grifters, or they're just raising money for self-enrichment. Well, Action for Liberty, I believe, has 2 full-time staffers and then some part-time people helping out. And MCCL actually has 2 full-time staffers and a part-time office person too. My guess is that their overhead is very similar. And they, maybe Action for Liberty is spending more money on technology and email and door knocking and, podcasts and things like that to get their message out. But their fundraising and messaging costs are pretty similar. And of course, their record over the past 8 years is probably about the same too. Because MCCL hasn't been very successful in the last 8 years getting stuff through, just because we've had a Democrat governor maybe, or the legislature hasn't been cooperative. But these organizations aren't grifting any more than a legislator that raises $50,000 for an election and gets in there and doesn't advance the principles of the party that helped them get in office, right? So all of these organizations need to fund themselves, to fund their operation, just like the Chamber of Commerce raises money and then tries to advance their legislation to get things through for their own members. And so it frustrates me when I see these attacks from our own party, from the House Republican Caucus and other groups against any grassroots organization that wants to raise money to advocate for limited government or has principles that most of us believe in.
Yeah, and sorry, Tim, but
no, go ahead.
If you look at the Republican Party Constitution, read that. That's what I am. That's what I'm doing, right? So I feel like I'm following the principles of what our Constitution says, and I'm a principled person, and I'm going to fight for those values. But then when I have people in my own party saying, "Well, he's whatever," I'm not going to get deep into the weeds there. But I'm literally watch what I'm doing. Look at the bills I'm bringing forward. Look at the amendments I have. Look what I do. Look what I say. Everything I say is exactly what our Constitution says, and that's what I'm fighting for.
So confrontational politics, which is what I understand is the methodology of an Action for Liberty, I don't agree with. I know it makes me uncomfortable, but I don't see the end result in it. And I've talked to people that are with Action for Liberty at length about that. They disagree with me, but again, they have their right to do that. Okay. But we need to take a step back and understand how something like Action for Liberty came forward. It grew out of the fundamental frustration of Republicans not always doing what they say they're going to do, or not standing up for the principles of the party, as Nathan is saying. So they might be a reaction to something. Again, I don't personally like the approach. I don't like it because I don't think it's going to be in a long-term successful. I could be wrong, by the way. It's just my opinion. I don't like it, but it's this exact same thing that people are saying Action for Liberty is attacking me. They're just here to cause problems and raise money. Well, no, they erupted out of this huge vacuum that is in the Republican Party of people standing up for principles and doing the right thing.
Yeah, and it's frustrating. Like my house rep, I'm getting emails now saying I'm lying about him. I'm showing people his votes that he just took in the last week and showing them what's in the bill. And I don't know if he's telling them that, no, that's not true, or I had to. I don't know what it is, but I'm being told I'm lying. I'm giving people information. I'm showing them about, you voted for, millions of dollars in LGBTQ plus stuff, the healthcare for illegals, the DEI things. That's in there, and that's true. We can't be voting for that, and we have to stop it. We have to be principled. We have to say no. And the thing is, they'll come through and say again, well, there was something good in there. I had to vote for it. No, you don't. You vote no, and that's we fight. You message, and you get strong, and you put the work in. And I think maybe some people probably just are lazy and they're not willing to work and go door knock and talk to people. They're there, and they say I have to vote this way, or somehow I'm not going to get reelected, or I'm not actually fighting for ensuring grandma or something, right?
Yeah. Well, Tim, you nailed it on the head when you said that Action for Liberty kind of came out of this void where people were frustrated because their legislators, like as I like to say, actually, I think Cal Barr once told me, which I've repeated a lot, when Republicans' speeches don't match their votes. That's the growing frustration of the grassroots. So instead of attacking Action for Liberty or these other groups that are popping up from the grassroots, if they just listened to and respected the voice of the grassroots and respected the endorsement process without either corrupting the endorsement process or just ignoring it altogether and running their own candidates, then Action for Liberty wouldn't even exist because there would be no room for them. I think that MCCL, when they first started, they were confrontational politics. They used to primary candidates. Minnesota Taxpayers League, same thing. They would primary sitting Republicans.
I have friends who went to jail for a weekend acting on behalf of MCCL in the past.
Yeah. So they used to be, most groups kind of start out of that void, and then they get soft as legislators like, okay, well, why don't you come in the office and we'll work on your bill. I'll write your bill, or they start working with that organization. And once the organization's in the office, they don't want to be shown the door. So they cooperate more and they defend legislators. And it's kind of a natural reaction until they create their own void on the conservative side, where a new group comes in, whether it's Action for Liberty or some of these other pro-life groups step in to try to take over to fill that void. And same with NRA, same thing, where the NRA has now gotten really, really weak. And so there's more groups like NAGR that kind of came up to the right of them. Bill, I muted you because I got some road traffic coming in, but you got some. If you can unmute yourself, I'd like to hear your thoughts too.
Yeah, so sorry, I'm traveling. My wife's driving, not me. So in case anybody's worried about me driving and talking, but anyways, my big concern is we hear this constantly about grifting, right? And that's the number one thing that everybody throws around. Well, this person's grifting, that person's grifting. Well, no, they're fundraising over an issue. And yeah, some of the confrontational politics, Jeremy, I think you hit it on the head. Every group at some point uses confrontational politics. Even the other side, right? The far left is going to use confrontational politics. We just saw it today. They're yelling, "You're killing our communities," after the deal was signed by leadership for what was coming forward. It happens, right? Like confrontational politics, no matter which side you're on, happens. And getting called out for your votes, it's pretty standard. I don't think I've ever had a vote where I don't at least get one person mad at me for how I voted on something. And that's confrontational politics at its finest. You're always going to get yelled at for something. You're never making everybody happy, no matter what way you vote. And it's just part of doing the job. And so, getting mad because Action for Liberty calls me out for a bad vote. No, I'm going to actually take that to heart in a different way. If they call me out for a bad vote, my first thing is going to be, well, what did I do wrong? What did I interpret differently? And then if I voted the way I think I should have, then I should be able to explain why I voted that way, even if it's not the way they wanted to vote. So that's the way I look at it, and that's the way I approach this whole thing.
And as legislators, we're doing things that not every outside person knows, or I'm not going to call you 3 minutes before I have to do something because you don't know what's going on the fly. So I might make an amendment or give a 12-second floor speech to try to whip someone real quick on the floor. And I did that last week and got Hoffman to come my way. Unfortunately, someone else voted wrong, but there's things we got to do like that to try to make our things happen. I did want to talk about, I don't know how long does your podcast go?
As long as we need to. Yeah.
So I did want to bring up, I think that abortion's wrong and we have to fight for life. And that's what we need to do. And we have to be principled and always stand up for what we believe in. If someone's holding a gun to your head, you don't say, wait, yeah, I'll get in the boxcar. Well, you know where that's going, right? You got to fight back, and you either fight back or you die. So, I had Life Begins at Conception as amendment, and Don Parker pressured people in the House not to bring it. And there were many House members that were, um, disheartened, but they didn't. They were new and they didn't understand maybe the politics, so they didn't bring it. But I had it. He came into my office and he told me I couldn't bring Life Begins at Conception as an amendment. Now I've got MCCL coming to my community, to my churches, and saying, "Give us money. We believe life begins at conception." And then they come to my office and say, "You can't offer that amendment." They told me I could not offer Life Begins at Conception as an amendment. I said, "Well, we're done. Get out of my office." And it ended there. And I offered that amendment. That we have to fight. We can't just stop. If we stop and we don't fight, we lose. And that's where we are, because we've become complacent. Look at Minnesota. You can't say we're great. We think that if we're soft and we try to be nice, and the left is playing for blood, and we have to push back and we have to say, no, we're not going to do it. And we have to stand up and we have to be principled. And we need to do that. And we need to get all these people in Minnesota that believe in us and believe that the same thing to come out and vote, so we can get more people to push back.
Yeah, I also want to talk about the excuse that you hear from the Republicans who voted for this bill in the House, that we're only half of one leg of a three-legged stool. We hear that a lot. The Republicans, the idea that we can wait until we control both the House and the Senate and the governor's mansion before we do anything is just bogus. Because the Democrats, Tim and I served in the legislature when the Republicans had a supermajority in the House. I think I was House member number 79 or something, and we had a majority in the Senate, but we had Governor Mark Dayton, and Republicans, did some good stuff, but they put it all in one huge omnibus bill. Think of that. All the legislation from the whole session in
All
one
of
big
it.
bill. And they put it on Mark Dayton's desk. And you know what he did? He vetoed it.
Vetoed it.
One leg of the three-legged stool, and he wasn't backing down. So the idea that Democrats fight when they're in the minority, or when they only control one branch or one leg of the three-legged stool, we should too. And if all the Republicans in the House voted no on a budget bill, they could stop government from being funded and say, look, we're not going to fund it unless you do this, whether it's, passing the Never Again bill, or, taking a stand on something. 3 years ago, we thought that the budget that was already way too high. And then the Democrats had a trifecta and they added $20 billion in spending. And now you have Republicans voting to basically fund it at the same level.
More. And that's in a deficit budget where we have to balance a deficit, and there's still more spending coming in. Oh, I know.
Yeah. So it looks like you guys are going to a special session. You're not going to get everything done by Sunday night. So it's very possible. People have asked me what I thought would happen. You guys might think that they're going to have a special session quickly. I think they're going to wait until the last week of June, because if you don't fund government by July 1st, everything shuts down. It doesn't just go to essential services. And so because all of government shutting down is something that Republicans can't stomach being blamed for, and Republicans somehow can't say, look, we offered reasonable reforms of maybe returning to the pre-COVID budget, which we back then thought was too high. This is what's reasonable. And we could return, $8,000 to every married couple in Minnesota, or every household, whatever, for tax relief, and just draw a line in the sand. We can't stomach the Democrats blaming the shutdown on us. So if Walz says we're going to do a special session the week before that deadline of the government shutting down, he'll have all of the bargaining power, and Republicans will basically vote for. I mean, you only need one House member to vote for it, and they'll pass
today we had that agreed upon budget, and
the universal.
but Mark Johnson didn't sign on to it. The Senate, hadn't heard about it, so he had to come and talk to us about it. We don't like it, so we're not signing on to it. Well, then immediately the far left members, of the Democrat Party in the Senate and the House, well, actually, I didn't see the end of it, but they started protesting when he was speaking, and then they all started crying and went into a tizzy, and that's what they did to get what they wanted. Then they held a press conference saying, Republicans are killing Minnesotans because we're not funding illegal health care, and we're not doing these horrible things to children, and we're not letting 12-year-olds get abortions. You're right. We don't want to do that. In my mind, if the government shuts down, that's great, because then we have less horrible spending. People get to keep their money, and it's a good thing. I mean, that sounds weird, I guess, maybe, but then we can push, and we can fix things better. The House is 67-67. All the Republican House members should be voting together and tying things up until we get what we want. That's the tizzy we should be throwing that they threw. We got 67 members. It takes 68 votes to pass anything. All of them now, after that today, vote together. Let's have special sessions until December so we can actually help Minnesotans.
Yep. Yeah. So in other words, when Republicans tell you that they can't stop anything because they don't have the numbers and that they're in this tide, that if you all voted together, and believe me, Democrats will, we saw that in the trifecta when they passed the most extreme legislation imaginable. And you had rural Democrats who were reasonable on so many issues. They held their nose and voted lockstep with their caucus to advance the liberal principles of their party. We should have Republicans doing the same on our side. And instead, we have our own party attacking the grassroots, and some really good organizations like MCCL coming out and attacking the grassroots too, and defending these votes to do exactly what their organization is trying to prevent.
And I think it's rather funny when, like MCCL says this is bad and we're attacking these people. So we've got Republicans attacking the grassroots base and saying you guys are bad. Well, why aren't you saying, when we have Republicans speaking to Democrats and trying to make deals, why aren't you calling those people Democrats then? And why aren't you attacking them for making these really bad deals with Democrats?
Yeah. Bill, you have some final words?
It's frustrating, like going back to that abortion amendment that we had on the Senate floor, and we had Senator May Quaid stand up and talk about how abortion is necessary because it saves maternal and infant health. And I sat there and I literally just stood up and asked, how are we saving infants if we're killing them? And of course, there was no response, because the answer is you're not. And I get so frustrated because if we all stick together, we can stop anything. I mean, nothing has to go to the governor's desk if we just vote no. And that's I guess that's my final thought is, why are we caving? And the thing that we hear around the Senate floor is, well, the last time we had a shutdown, or even the threat of a shutdown, we lost the next election, and we're so concerned about re-election and not doing the right thing. And that's the thing that bothers me the most.
Well, I would say, in talking to a lot of Republican strategists who tell me, well, just, wait on constitutional carry until we have the trifecta, until we have control of all three branches and, the governor's mansion, the House and the Senate, then we'll get through everything. But I know that if Republicans ever do take control of everything, they will do then everything will shift to preserving the power, and that they don't want to lose elections. It's so frustrating.
Well, that's correct. That's correct, but so is the practicality. The Democrats 2 times now since I've been involved in Minnesota politics have held all 3, House, Senate, and governor's office. And this last term, the last cycle before this one, they couldn't get their number 1, well, actually number 2. They couldn't get their number 2 item out, and that was putting a constitutional ERA amendment on the table. They couldn't get it done. So having all 3 is no guarantee, because you touched on it. They're going to back away and say, well, we need to maintain this power. There's all these different reasons. I actually don't, I'm brash enough to say that I don't think the Republican Party on the issue of life truly believes in the life issue anymore. They want to lean on that side, and I think in their heart they believe part of it, but there's been enough opportunities to truly take a stand on it where they haven't, that I don't think I've been in the caucus room, and I've had pro-life organizations or people say, how many legislators, this is when I was in office, how many legislators can you count on if things really get tough to vote pro-life? And I was rounding up to come up with 12 people that I thought that would really stand true on it in the entire, and that's out of anywhere from 65 to 75 legislators. And I have friends that are going to get upset with me when I say that, but it's just frankly true. I saw it when I came to the caucus room and would say, listen, we can win on this. We need to support it and stuff like that. When the first time I brought my heartbeat bill forward, you talk about MCCL, in my own caucus room, I was being told not to bring that forward. That if I bring that forward, that's going to cause this person and that person to lose their next election. And we just need to be a little bit, why can't you support, inspections of abortion clinics? And I'm like, well, that doesn't do anything. And yes, my heartbeat bill, which isn't even perfect anyway, yes, it's the Hail Mary sort of pass, but you need to inspire people with that. You can do both, right? But no, there is just not that commitment. And for my Republican friends who are watching this, you prove me wrong. You prove me wrong that you are truly dedicated to fighting for something like this, and I will get behind you. I don't want you to hide behind Dovie Gomez anymore.
Well, one of the reasons why there's not an appetite for being for real pro-life legislators is because there's not a lot of money in it. You look at the groups that are funding elections. MCCL doesn't really donate, if at all, to anything, but they might help with some, send out mailers and stuff. But the Chamber of Commerce, Minnesota Business Partnership, all of these big pro-business groups have a lot to gain by having a pro-business majority in the legislature. And those are the ones that are really driving force behind elections and choosing the candidates and such. And so they want a majority, a trifecta, so that they can pass pro-business legislation and lower taxes and get all these great tax cuts and handouts to their industries. And they're not. They don't want anybody talking about abortion.
The Minnesota Business Partnership is going to totally stifle anything that has to do with life or family or anything like that. No, I agree.
And I think, any elected official has to realize that's kind of funny, because a lot to get selected for doing whatever. I just came out because I didn't feel like I had anybody representing me, and I ran and I won. And, I believe in God and I believe in our Constitution. And then I represent 86,000 people, and those are the people I listen to. You don't tell me this is what you're going to do. You don't say this is how you're going to vote. I ran on who I am, and I got elected, and that's what I'm going to do.
I live in the same boat as Nate. I had pro-jobs majority supporting my primary opponent to the tune of 28 or 43,000, depending on which IEs you look at. He was being represented or supported by business, and I own my own small business. I was a member of my local chamber, and the reason I say was is because after I found out what was happening, I no longer wanted to be a member of the chamber. And so it's frustrating because I ran on who I am. I ran on what I represent, and now I represent 86,000 people or more, being that my Senate district is one of the largest or fastest growing Senate districts, with the housing going in on the north end of my district. It's frustrating when we can't stand on principles and we have to start worrying about what lobbyist group or what interest group is out there. And it's frustrating to me because my job is to represent my constituents, and that's the thing that we should all be doing. So I got yelled at for voting against two of the amendments that were in committee related to abortion in 2023. It was my first committee hearing ever with Senate File 1. It was pretty frustrating when I heard these amendments and they were brought forward from MCCL, and they were not related to protecting life. They were saying, well, abortion's okay, but we're going to make sure we give them a pain med before they're aborted. And I'm going, well, that's disgusting. I'm not voting for that amendment. Now, of course, unfortunately, I ended up voting for the amendment on the Senate floor because we offered, I think 165 amendments and spent 16 and a half hours on the Senate floor. And the purpose of that messaging was a little bit different, but in committee, I refused to vote for those amendments because at the end of the day, my principles said I can't vote for these amendments. That would be like saying abortion's okay, and I'm not doing that. And so
Well,
I got a
on the
lot of flack
Senate
for that.
floor, it's different than in committee. You didn't want it to even get out of committee. So on the Senate floor, the amendment was offered. We know that abortion's going on. So now at this point, we're trying to cause as little pain to these unborn children as possible.
Right, and that was the position that I was in. Was
Right.
Once we're in the Senate floor, it's too late. The bill's going on, so let's see if we can get any form of change to this bill, and that was what we were trying to do.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you for jumping on to kind of dive deep into this issue that's been bubbling up, and I hope this has been helpful for people tuning in to kind of listen to all sides of this and to better understand this debate and where we are as a state on abortion and what's possible to change and what needs to happen for us to actually move the issue forward. Either lock arms as Republicans, we could stop it, or continue pushing for legislation and trying to win majorities, but we already have the power to draw a line in the sand to do something. If Republicans wanted to die on this hill, they could. So, yep. So thank you again for tuning in for another episode of the Omnibus podcast, where all subjects are germane.
Everything comes to the floor in such a hyper-partisan manner.
I would argue that it's already in the Constitution. We've overtaxed people. People like to legislate by emotion. It's important to address when the governor oversteps his boundaries. I'll pull up my pocket version here. 1,000-page omnibus bills that nobody knows what's in it.